morning, everyone. I was just having to think for a second. Is it still morning? Yes, right? Good morning. Hi. Can you hear me okay? So we are recording this event, which is why we're using microphones. My name is Anna Olsen. I'm Assistant Vice Provost of the Center for Faculty Excellence, previously known as CTRL and even longer ago known as CTE. And it's with great pleasure that I get to introduce the moderator for this event, which is the Center's relatively new Director of Teaching, Gemma Puglisi, who is also an assistant professor in the School of Communication. So welcome, Gemma. I'm going to let Gemma introduce the panelists. I did want to mention, before you leave later, if you want to pick up a little brochure about the center where you can see some of the new things we're doing, it's outside, so on your way out. But for now, welcome to our panelists and to Gemma, who will introduce them.
Thank you very much. We're good. No, I'm good. I'm all set. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Anna, for that lovely introduction and for all the work that you do at the center. You are amazing. Thank you very much. I'm so honored to have all of you here today and to hear from two extraordinary scholar teachers. You know, when I had to put look, there's like pages for an introduction. I thought, this introduction could last from 11:30 to 12:30. So I had to literally cut and paste and tell you about how extraordinary these two people are. So let's get started. Our first amazing speaker is Beck Hamilton. Rebecca Beck. She hails from New Zealand. And while going to the University of Sydney, she was an honor student. She majored in psychology, and she received the University Medal, one of the institution's top undergraduate awards for academic achievement. She also landed the prestigious Frank Knox Memorial Fellowship, which was a full merit scholarship to Harvard University. In 2007, she graduated not only with a law degree, but a master's in public policy. She is with the Washington College of Law. She started there in 2016 after she had served as a lawyer in the prosecutorial division of the International Criminal Court, working as a foreign correspondent at Reuters. As a former journalist at NBC News, I was so excited to see this. A foreign correspondent at Reuters and the Washington Post, and she worked at New York University School of Law and Columbia University. She is internationally recognized expert in atrocity prevention. She also serves as executive editor of Just Security. It is a nonpartisan daily digital law and policy journal housed in the Rice Center on Law and Security at NYU Law. In April of this past year, she received AU Scholar/Teacher of the Year award, and she said, "I'm very grateful for both parts of this award, and I really appreciate that AU recognizes the value of both teaching and scholarship." She has also done an incredible job mentoring students. She serves as a mentor for Advance, the law school's first-gen student organization, where she reminds legal eagles that there's no singular path to success because Beck is a first-generation high schooler, college student, and law school graduate. During her sabbatical in 2024, she spent time in Malta as a Fulbright U.S. scholar and at the University of California in Los Angeles as a visiting professor. Also in the summer of 2024, she completed her first marathon swim across Lake Geneva from Switzerland to France to raise funds for Zibel, a Maltese nonprofit that recovers ghost nets, a term for lost or discarded fishing gear in which marine life can also become entangled. I'm so honored to have Beck be one of our panelists today. Now, let me hear from, yes, please applaud. I'm also honored to have Todd Eisenstadt, who is Professor, Research Director of the Center for Environmental Policy of the School of Public Affairs. He is a principal investigator of a National Science Foundation 2025 to 2028 grant relating to his research project evaluating climate, laws, institutions, policies, and practices in nation states. He has worked on 6 continents, publishing multiple award-winning books and dozens of articles on climate change and environmental policy and political development. He just co-authored Climate Change Science and the Politics of Shared Sacrifice for Oxford University Press, which was in 2022. His research has been funded by the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Bank, Fulbright Commission, the National Security Education Program, the Ford and Mellon Foundations, USAID, and the National Science Foundation. A former director of multiple United States agencies for international development grants in Mexico, Todd has trained hundreds of stakeholders in judicial reform, implementation, electoral observation, and other government processes. I'm thrilled. He's formerly an award-winning print journalist for the Nashville Tennessean in the Night Police Beat. I want to hear more about that. And a Capitol Hill staffer. He has consulted for the World Bank, for the Organization of American States, and several development companies. He's also held a lot of leadership positions at American University. He also served in the American University Faculty Senate, and thank you, Todd, for your service, because that is a huge position, and the fact that you were able to do this with all your other work, I know just as a faculty, I really appreciate the work that you have done. And you've also served on the Committee on Faculty Relations. You were the 2024 recipient of the university's highest award for Faculty Scholar/Teacher of the Year. Please welcome Todd.
Thank you.
So that's what I was telling you. I could have spent the whole hour on their bio. So what we thought we would do, and I appreciate it, was great to hear from both of them, rather than going back and forth with questions, and I'm going to start with you, Beck. I'm going to ask each of you for 15 minutes to just talk about general advice that you have as a scholar/teacher, but more so as a teacher. And in those advice that you do, you may want to share with us maybe a scenario or two in the classroom that you think people would really appreciate and learn from. So let's start with Beck.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you for coming out during this less than optimal weather pattern we have going here. So honestly, I feel very uncomfortable imagining that I have any advice, and I think both Todd and I kind of pushed back a little bit on the idea of advice. But I do have some reflections, and I'm hoping that by sharing those, we can maybe generate some conversation, and we can hear from all of you about parts of that are responsive to things that you've experienced with students or in the classroom. But I wanted to begin with a tiny anecdote from 25 years ago. Todd, I think you know this, you've read my file. It is an anecdote involving a very small word, a 2-letter word, we, W-E. So 25 years ago, I was sitting in a Sociology 101 class, my first year of college. I had dropped out of high school at 15. And I started college when I was 22. So I felt very different from the students that were sitting beside me. But I was extremely excited to be there, just totally daunted by the enterprise that I was taking on. Anyway, this sociology lecturer, who's, if he's alive today, I'm sure he's mortified that I am telling this anecdote 25 years later. But we were talking about challenges in moving populations of people who had been living on the streets into permanent housing. And he set up the frame of the conversation. It's a lecture hall of like 100 students, with the phrase, now, we can't know what it's like to be homeless, but we can imagine X, Y, and Z. And in that singular moment, I, who had been homeless just 2 years prior, got the very clear message that was already bouncing around in my head of, I do not belong here. There is a we within this classroom, and that we is constructed of people who cannot know what it is like to experience homelessness. Therefore, I do not belong here. It's such a small moment. And again, I'm sure the professor was not intending any kind of slight, would be mortified to hear this so many years later. But I come back to it because it reminds me every day in the classroom to be very intentional about the language that I'm using and to be very conscious of the power of the word choices that each of us make as we stand up there in front of a group of students. And it also, I think, makes me maybe more aware than most of the importance of getting to know my students as individuals. And obviously that the ability to do that shifts a lot depending on class size. In my 90-person 1L criminal law class, that takes a lot more effort. It means setting up, coffee hours every day of the week at the start of semester, so I get to meet them all individually. But that is also a helpful piece of this. And then in terms of sort of reflecting on some of the things that I've become aware of over time about what works for me, and I don't want to suggest, I think everyone is different. So take this for whatever it might be worth in your classroom. Transparency with the pedagogical choices I'm making is something that has been very effective for me in building the kind of classroom environment where my students can learn to trust me, because I don't take it for granted that just because I'm the one who's up at the podium that they should trust my choices necessarily. And so just to give you one concrete example, you'll have all kind of heard, particularly about law schools, the dreaded cold calling, right? We put students on the spot and use the Socratic method. And there are a lot of law professors these days that don't cold call because it creates often a lot of student anxiety. You can ask a student about anything that they've read in the past week, and in law school we do a lot of reading. I cold call, and very intentionally. And so I start the semester by explaining to the students why I do that. And I explain to them that I grade participation, as they know, it's a section on their syllabus. And by the time I get them, they're in the second semester, which is helpful because they have all had the first semester experience whereby they know they're in a section of people that there will be some students every time, right? They are the students that are confident, that feel comfortable speaking their opinion, that don't even mind if they get the answer wrong. They're just happy to try. If I take volunteers, then it is those students that I will hear from all the time in class. And so when it comes to grading participation, those are the students that are getting the grade because those are the students that I've heard from, which really means I'm grading on personality, not on participation. Anyway, I explained this all to them at the start of the semester to try to both make it very clear that I'm not doing cold calling to just create anxiety for them, which often has been their experience. And it's helpful now that I've been doing this for a number of years that I have alumni of my class who are willing to reinforce that message. Oh yeah, it's Hamilton, she cold calls, but she's not scary. And that's the message that has sort of become associated with me. And it means the benefit for me is that I do get to talk to every single student in that 90-person class. And it has the added benefit, and I tell them this too, that when you're being cold called, you will be prepared. They are prepared for every class. But it only works, I think, and I can only feel comfortable doing it and building that trust with them with that explanatory work being done at the outset. A second thing that is important to me in my teaching, and this sort of circles back to not making assumptions about the backgrounds of students in my class or about their learning styles, and the recognition that students learn differently and have different strengths. I do really use a variety of teaching methods. And I'm happy to talk through that. But one of the favorite things that I do when I teach my national security law class, for example, is I run a simulation of a National Security Council deputies meeting. And it's, classic sort of simulation role play. I have them briefed out in their roles, whether they're representing DOJ or the Joint Chiefs of Staff or whichever role they're assigned to. They get those instructions, and on the day that we run the simulation, they come into the space, everybody in role, and the chair of the National Security Council runs that class, is responsible for the timing. I've worked with that student before so that it runs smoothly. And what strikes me every single time, even though I know it, right? I've done this many times, and it still surprises me how there's invariably at least one student who has been kind of very reticent to speak we've done about 5 classes by the time we run the simulation. And in-role emerges as this completely different personality. And after that simulation, it's different in class too. And it's not only, I don't want to give examples of particular student names, but just thinking of last year, this student who came into role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, took on that role, and you could see there were other students who were like, this is just a side of this person that we haven't seen before. And what was delightful was that confidence carried over once we moved out of the simulation. So that's just one of those great moments of joy that you get. I do. How am I going for time?
You're good. You're great.
I'll
You got
just
like
say
10 more minutes.
Two more things.
Actually, you got 10 minutes.
It drives me insane that we
5.
do student evaluations at the end of semester. Like what? I do midterm evaluations of my students. It's not part of any formalized process, but I want to know how it's going for them. And I don't expect that, there will be some who give me regular feedback and office hours, more feedback than one could ever possibly want. But there are some students who will not do that. And they need a space where they can be confident, that they can stay anonymous, in order to really tell me how the class is going for them. And so I run a mid-semester evaluation anonymously submitted, so that I have a chance to course correct. I don't understand that we would only hear from students after the semester has finished, when it is too late if something is not working for them, to change it. And so I do that. I explain why I'm doing that. I explain truly it is anonymous. And then in the class after the class they come back, I show them the feedback that they, as a class, where they're feeling, where they're at, what the pace of the readings is. And, consistently, they feel like it's a little bit more reading than we would like, but also it's law school, right? And then sometimes there'll be something where it's really bothered some of them. That one example is, I have a discussion forum that I had due 5 p.m. the night before class, and students were like, "We really need till midnight to do this." So that gave me a chance to explain, well, I really want to read your feedback before class so I have time to see where there are problems, synthesize that into my teaching material for the next day. So midnight doesn't work for me, but there's no reason we can't set this at 8 o'clock at night. Would that be helpful? Yes, transformative. Thank you, right? Tiny adjustments. It doesn't cost me anything to do that, but I wouldn't know about it unless I asked, and asking in a way that is safe for students to express how they're feeling. Finally, I would just say, and this goes back to the being nervous about the sense of any advice. When I started out in my first year of teaching, and I've done this at different points since, I pretty methodically went round and sat in on all my colleagues' classes with their permission, obviously. And we have a formal onboarding and evaluation process as we come on as professors, and so I was getting that formal rank and tenure committee process. But I also myself just wanted to see what was out there in terms of teaching styles. And what was really striking about that, in addition to being just a truly enjoyable experience, and if you haven't done it, I highly recommend it, is there is no one way to do this. Like, I have colleagues that are just total hard asses. They come in with the full, like, scary professor thing, and there are students that love it. I mean, they make it work because that is their authentic personality. And I have colleagues that are on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, and that works as well, because they are taking their authentic personality and bringing it into the classroom in a way that works. And so I really, while I agree there are best practices, and I've tried to highlight some of those, and I'm sure Todd has many more ideas, and so do the people in this room. I think at the end of the day, there's no single script for how to do this, and that it is a lifelong learning process for all of us, and how incredibly lucky we are to get to do this.
Thank you. Wow. I know you're thinking of 50 million questions to ask Beck. We're going to go right now. Thank you so much for that. Todd?
Thank you very much. And I was thinking as Beck was talking about kind of the inflection points that I come back to in my own life that I think affect my teaching. So I think I will share one of those along with, I do have some advice, but I don't think it comes from being particularly, a great teacher. I think it comes from having enough hours in the classroom that you sort of learn how to do it. So I think there are instructive aspects for people who have less time in the classroom. And of course, I mean, I never listened enough before, and I wouldn't expect others to. I mean, you have to learn this yourself in some regard. However, I will, I think, start by saying that, I always, when I'm encountering difficulties identifying with undergrads in particular, and I have a daughter who's an undergrad, so I face this in many regards, but I think back to when I was 19 and I was doing study abroad in Bogota, Colombia, as a stringer for the Gannett News Service, where I had been working in Nashville the summer before, and there was a Supreme Court takeover by the M19 insurgency. The president of Colombia nowadays was actually part of that at that time. And so it's very interesting how things have evolved. But what I would say is that, I for that and for a volcanic eruption, which killed thousands of people, I left the school for a couple of weeks, took time and covered those events. And I was talking to my mother before going to the volcano, and she said she forbade me from going. And I was an adult pleaser as a kid, and I had a very close relationship with my mother. So I think it might have been the first time I directly confronted her and disobeyed. And I said, well, I'm not calling to ask your permission. I'm just calling to tell you that I'm going. And she was flabbergasted, and I could hear her flummoxing in the phone for a minute or two, and then she said, well, take your galoshes. whatever that means. I mean, there wasn't, I think she was referring to keeping my feet dry. There was a lot of mud. Anyway, I think about how that opened my eyes to experiential learning, to trying to have as much empathy and awareness of things going on around one, and that students, I think, need stimulus, and they need to be brought close to those kinds of moments of kind of hard, real world experience as much as you can. And I think this is hard sometimes in the classroom, which is why it is great that American University offers, internship programs, study abroad programs, which, if handled well, rather than just used as sometimes my own program when I was 19 was kind of a crutch program, which was, the university used it as a way of, allowing me to get credits abroad, but it wasn't as rigorous or highly regulated, I think. I think AU's programs, for the most part, are a bit different and pretty good, but we can make them better. So I think we, as professors who follow their progress, who talk to them, who sponsor independent studies on the side of these internships they have downtown sometimes, I think those are very important components of what we can do for them based in Washington, D.C. especially. And I do that. I'm in the Department of Government, so it's kind of a natural. But I think across the campus, there are opportunities for faculty to do that. So I think that's an important aspect, giving them real world experience as well as an academic context and complement. And I also do simulation. So in the climate change class, we run a model UN and then talk about how countries' own interests invariably overrun the collective good, unfortunately. But that's typically what happens. And the students are all disappointed that they couldn't come to an agreement. But on the other hand, we then study for a few days why that is and how could it be different. So I think, simulations and case studies, which I also encourage in the classroom by either writing them myself for some of the climate classes that I teach, or using some of the other kind of business school type case studies, assigning students positions, forcing them to debate even on an unpopular position to them, I think helps them, because I think students nowadays suffer from inadequate interpersonal skills and communication. And I think that's really part of what a good college education can still do them, give to them, which we couldn't. This wasn't always a basic part of the offerings of a university education, but I think increasingly we have to make them able to negotiate, to communicate, to ask for what they need, but be polite and empathetic. And I think that that's always something to keep in mind. Higher education is under strain. I mean, we all know this. There's now kind of an imperative to professionalize students rather than just teaching them. It used to be they were students. Now sometimes they're consumers, and we are sometimes reduced to being, knowledge servers, right? So we're not always revered. I mean, thank you for the apple, and apples aside, we're not always treated the way that I think we used to be. I think higher ed in particular, but I hear this lower down in the educational system earlier. Childhood teachers also now are getting pushback, and it's about, we can't just teach them anymore. It has to be knowledge directed for some practical end. And I push back against that, and I think we should still just try to encourage intellectual curiosity, but that we also do have an obligation also to meet these professional standards. And so whenever you can add some sort of skill and be sure and tell them that you're doing that, I think that adds value, and it makes them think about what you're doing in a different way, unfortunately. But I think that's important. I think, in the classroom, I agree that we have to try and encourage everyone to speak out. And I think that we have a role of trying to move discussion along, respecting students and their views, but also I like to sort of, refocus. If the class discussion is like a bowling lane and you get a few gutter balls, you can put the You can re-steer those back. You have to, and if you're gonna, if you're gonna interrupt, I think there's a cost of interruption. It has to be gentle, and it has to be after you let them, muddle through for a few minutes. But there is a point where there's a hush in the classroom, and it starts to be time to redirect. And I think that's important. I think, there's a trade-off between attending to the individual students and keeping the class moving forward. And that you just have to be aware of that trade-off and try and keep the discussion moving. I also think that, especially in these times, that you have to avoid being ideological. That is to say, we all have our political positions. Most of us got into higher education based on a very strong idealism and a preference for a certain way that we think society should be. And certainly these days, and perhaps before too, but I would argue these days, goals like establishing good, strong freedom of speech are under threat, but that doesn't mean we get to make the discussion polemical. Our job is to present them facts so that they can interpret those. So I clearly present facts in a way that I think they need to perceive them, but I try not to make it a political discussion. And when it gets too political, I try to steer it back. And I think, that may be an issue more in political science than in chemistry, but it is, I think, an issue that all of us may face to one degree or another. So I think it's important in these times to model good citizenship, which is, giving everyone a chance, listening, not just shooting, students with opposing views down or with views that might be inconsistent with sometimes the factual discussion. I mean, I've had, climate denier students, and they're interesting to have, and if they're articulate, you want to engage them, and they'll trip you up every class. So I let them a class or two, and then I sort of try and I figure out how to I try and talk to them a little bit after class, and I say, we're assuming the existence of this phenomenon in this class, and we're going to move forward with those assumptions. Your point is taken, but there's also a lot of material we have to cover, and so we're going to do that. So you want to give a little bit of space to opposing views. I think there's a problem, for example, with climate denial now, is that if you allow it to be a legitimate discussion in the class, then you're empowering positions that are just demonstratedly false. So, there's issues, but you don't want to be disrespectful. You want to find a way to move towards what you're trying to teach, but without making it too polemical. And I think that's part of the problem nowadays, is that we all have our social media feeds and we have positions that are not based on our common movement towards a just society, but rather on whoever we listen to on the last podcast, unfortunately. And the students are getting into that somewhat early, and we need to pull them into the common space and reassume and defend that space with all that we can. Because without it, unfortunately, I'm not sure higher ed is going to be that useful. So I would put an emphasis on that. I do believe that I start as kind of the harder at the beginning of the semester. I try and put down the rules, and the syllabus is a contract, and then I ease up as we go, because I figure that if a couple of people drop, especially if there's a wait list, then you'll get a few more students, and you can work that way. And that if there's people that don't want to do the assignments right on time and with the amount of effort you require, then they can fall by the wayside. And so I sort of am the tough guy early on for that reason, but I typically soften by about this time in the semester, and then I become too easy. So that by the end of the semester, so then students come in and they negotiate whatever they can, because once you have that reputation, then then you're too soft, right? I think that if I would add anything else, it would be also that it's important to continue trying to improve. It's important to continue adding and reflecting, and that teaching is a process. The syllabus is never done. The notes are never complete, and that it's something that you need to continue as it's a life work, and so it's a process, not a destination, like probably most things. I guess I would also just end saying that it's very important to try to set a good example. None of us always do that, but we still have to try. And I think that the students are paying attention. And if you gloss over someone's point or are dismissive, they register that, and it takes you a semester to gain their respect, but I think you can lose it in 5 minutes if you don't try to uphold your standards of comportment in the classroom, and if you don't try to demonstrate that you are someone trying to consistently pursue knowledge, right? And I think consistently pursuing knowledge is in danger a bit more in this country than it has been, and that makes it ever more important. And so I want to just thank you for coming and for allowing us to have this discussion. And so by way of, I know that it's going to be for you to have questions, but if I can just take
we've got 20 minutes for questions. So.
All right. So the last thing I'll just say is to ask you all about how we deal with preparing students increasingly for the workplace, but also continue to emphasize traditional kind of liberal arts training that we hope and think that undergraduate especially is for. And also the question of AI, which is, I think, increasingly both promising and menacing, depending on how we ultimately, wind up using it. I try to tell the students that they're going to use AI anyway, and that's going to be part of their skill set, but that they have to control the AI rather than vice versa, and that they have to write their own papers, but that they can use AI for any other step of researching. And I guess the last point that I would raise is that I think some colleagues are not assigning as many writing requirements as we used to. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think increasingly actually basic writing skills are also something that we need to continue to push, because it's more work to grade, and you have to help the students get a thesis. But I just think that is increasingly something special we can offer them, because we used to take this for granted when most of us were in college, that you came in with writing skills. That's not true anymore, and they need those. So I think that's, back to basics is part of the story here. All right, I better wrap up. So thank you.
Thank you all. Oh, great. Such incredible information. So Anna has the microphone. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand. Give us your name and the school that you are in.
Hi, thank you all for doing this. This has been very helpful and interesting. I teach in the government department, Florian Gabens. My question is about the use of technology in the classroom. Do you have any policy regarding the use of laptops? Sometimes you see, students really not paying attention, right? You can kind of tell. Is there a good way to deal with this based on your experience?
Why don't we start with that first? I'm just curious what happens at Washington College of Law.
Yeah. So back to the transparency point, I share research with my students about the degree to which the way that you process information is different, just note taking as opposed to handwriting, and studies showing the impact of your web surfing on those around you, even those around you that are not web surfing. So that is backing up what I have in my syllabus. Fundamentally, I would love to be able to say, it would be much easier to be able to say no laptops. However, I think I now am dealing with a generation who have been working on laptops from middle school, and that is feeling increasingly unrealistic to ask of them. People have different views on this. But what I do is I say in my syllabus that your laptop is purely for taking notes, explain why surfing, chatting, shopping, anything else not only harms you, but also the people around you. And for a lot of people, that's enough. And, we're dealing with law students, so it's already a self-selecting group of rule followers in general. But then adding on to that, I let them know that the PowerPoints that I'm presenting have everything that they need on them in terms of the fundamentals, and that I will be, and I do, post them immediately after class. So your role in this classroom is to be paying attention and engaging in the conversation, and it is a very, very interactive classroom and conversation. And the idea is that the PowerPoints then are the structure for your notes. You don't need to be replicating everything that I've got on the PowerPoint. And invariably someone will ask for the PowerPoints before class, at which point I have to explain that that tends to discourage people turning up to class. And so, no, I won't be doing that, but you will have them immediately afterwards. It's an ongoing challenge. I have in my biggest classes, I have a TA who sits at the back, who gives me, she can see all the screens, or he can see all the screens, gives me feedback on what's happening, and generally students are pretty good. I think the cold calling piece of this is not irrelevant. Knowing that you can be called on at any time helps focus attention. But I have colleagues doing it in different ways.
When you have somebody who's in the back of the room and they're just monitoring, and let's say you do catch a student that is, shopping, do you approach that student after? Do you send them an email? How do you deal with that?
Oh, no, I don't do. So I should say that the TA is not like monitoring specific individuals, just giving me like a general read of how engaged the class is.
Right.
So no, I wouldn't want to approach an individual student and have them feel like they in particular are being kind of monitored in that sense.
Okay, good.
But it gives me a read of the
I
room.
just want to interject here. I teach a public speaking class, and I also teach a portfolio class. And in the public speaking class, I can tell that and I said, folks, I would really appreciate, please turn your computers off and be respectful for your colleagues who are giving a speech. And they have told me that some of you are looking at your computers when they're speaking. So I'm going to ask you to please put your computers down and be respectful of one another. And there's not a problem. They are, because they know they want to have their colleagues looking at them. Todd, do you want to add really quickly anything?
No, I have a similar statement in the syllabus, and I try to discourage the use of laptops for other than note-taking. I also give availability of the notes and PowerPoints after class.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would just say is that, to me, I think the technology in the classroom issue is going to be bigger with AI. So I'm doing for the first time in undergraduate classes an oral final exam, where I'm going to talk to the students about their term paper, as well as a little bit about the end of the course and sort of the material covered. So I think that will just make sure that they know their paper. I hope. We'll see. I can tell you after that.
That's a great idea.
It's work, but I mean it's a lot of students, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's great advice. More questions, please. Yes.
Hi. Warren Nesbitt, Biology Department. I wanted to go back to something that you had mentioned, Todd, because as a biology teacher, I'm teaching things such as climate change, evolution. So, how do you strike a balance between critical thinking and free expression? In other words, if there's a class where you want the students to freely express their views, even if it's contrary to, what's considered accepted, how do you go about doing that and still maintain a classroom where people are, where students are free to express themselves, even if their views are contrary to the prevailing views that are out there with respect to climate change? Because I know where you're coming from. I teach that. I talk about evolution, and it's like, well, what's contrary to evolution? Intelligent design, creationism. So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, Warren, I guess I would also ask you that question. I mean, I think that you give opposing views a chance or two, and then you convey that, while there may be some dissent among a few people in the class, the overwhelming scientific consensus is, this one, and explain why that is. And because you have a syllabus to cover, and everyone has to benefit from the course. So at some point, challenges to basic facts are, if they're well articulated, are meaningful as a learning experience, but then they hit a point quickly where that's no longer the case, right? So I tried to think about the whole class and probably talk to the student after a class or two, ask them to just stay and see if you can, have them raise doubts with you maybe quietly after class rather than taking class time. And if they need to make statements in class, that just to do it somewhat periodically, that, and that you'll address them in class, but not 20 minutes out of a 70-minute course session. I don't know.
For example, I really never had any pushback. I mean, because when you express this to a student that 99.9% of the scientists think that climate change is real, then but I said, well, if there's anyone else in here who thinks otherwise, but generally speaking, I don't get any views to the contrary. So I just wanted to kind of see how you would approach a particular scenario like that.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you both for sharing your teaching. This is Sarah Gilchrist. I'm in the library, and I'm curious, you mentioned encouraging your students to use AI for research, and I know we've been using AI to describe a lot of different things, but to them, that often means using ChatGPT, and we've noticed that the large language models are not good research tools. They are good at putting words together in a predictable way using information that we can't verify. But do you have specific tools that you're recommending to your students that are tied to AI for research? Or are you leaving it up to them?
Yeah, I should clarify, I am not recommending my students use AI for research right now. They need, we have very specific legal research resources, and we have an incredible library staff at the law school who train them on how to actually do legal research. And the message is that the large language models are absolutely no substitute for that. They're an entirely different thing. Now, that's where we're at now. I should say there's a huge industry push to get AI into all of this. And there's this kind of hype around, oh my God, somehow students are not going to be able to survive in the world unless they know how to use AI. I mean, I feel like the much bigger and more pressing challenge is, can they think critically and do the research that we know needs to be done? I'm not concerned that my kids aren't going to figure out how to use AI. And I think there'll be some professional development that will, over time, for their specific job that they're in, help them figure out in the times that they do need to use AI, how to use it most effectively for that situation. But I don't see myself being in the business of being a general AI trainer. But evolving conversation, right?
Yeah, I thank you for the chance to clarify, which is that I don't advocate for the use of AI. I just accept that. I just tell them, I know you all are going to use this anyway, and that we're going to check your papers with Turnitin or whatever equivalents we can find. However, if you're going to use it, don't let it steer you, and use it not in the writing stage. So so I don't want to go to the point of advocating particular AI tools, because that would be a recommendation. But at some point it may come to that, in which case we'll want to talk to you about, what would be better research tools. But I'm not at that point, and I would rather they didn't use it. And I myself try not to use it except for some clerical and grammatical and citations. That's what I use it for.
I'm going
Part
to,
of-
go ahead, please. No, please, go ahead.
I mean, but part of the argument that I'm, and I think a lot of my colleagues are making at the moment, is you are spending so much on your legal education to come here and learn to think like a lawyer. And you're really so I don't even give them that I know you're going to use it anyway. I don't. I'm expecting you do not use it. Because this time and this money you are spending is incredibly valuable, and you don't want to short circuit it. But again, evolving conversation.
I just wanted to mention, I'm in the school of communication, and I just went to a conference over the summer that our competitor, Syracuse University, Newhouse, put together. And they surveyed all of us, again, schools of communication, not law school and not that, okay, SPA. And I think myself and another person were the only two in the entire nation that did not use AI for communication. And the long and short story is that we are there. I have a guest, my former student who is in a big PR firm, has told students, you have to learn some of this in our field in public relations, because you may not get the job if you don't have a little bit of knowledge in public relations of how to use AI. And in the firm that he is in right now, he is training, he is telling his staffers, and these are students who graduate, kids that have graduated 5 years ago, we are going to teach you how to use AI tools. If you don't want to learn them, you may not have a job in 6 months, because some of them have come to him and said, Anthony, I don't want to do this. And he goes, okay, but just know that in 6 months, you may not have a job. So I'm with you on law school, and I certainly understand where you're coming from, but I think in certain fields, we're starting to see the use of AI and how some of our students are better served to know how to do some of it. Does that make sense? Okay. Another question, please. 5 more minutes, right, Anna?
We have about 4 more minutes, but I think this is a good moment to put a plug in for an event that CFE is hosting in this very room on Tuesday at 12. It's our first noontime conversation, and we have 6 faculty who are going to share their own personal stories of how they have discovered and adapted to the presence of AI in their
great.
teaching. So
Great,
come back.
great.
You can register afterwards.
More questions? We have time for a couple more. Yes.
I have told my students that I recognize they're going to use AI. I teach marketing, the principles of marketing. But I have said to them very clearly, and I keep repeating this, AI is not the student, you are.
Right. That's right. That's
So
right.
it's in accordance with what you have said, Beck, is you're paying to be here. Your parents are helping to pay you to be here. AI is not the student, you are.
Great comment.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Lynn Bauer-Sox. I'm a first-year adjunct faculty member in the School of Communications and teaching a graduate level course. Wondering what advice you have for us or reflections on helping ESL students navigate your course successfully.
I think so I'm just trying to think of sort of concrete examples. We have LLM students who are lawyers trained in a different country that come, and when there's been an issue there, the biggest thing that has been helpful is providing notes, providing PowerPoints, and then meeting after class. It's not rocket science in that sense, as well as being aware of speaking speed and all of those things that you will do anyway. But really, it's super helpful if you don't have to be stressed about note taking at the same time as you're absorbing the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree within limits. That is that we've had a few grossly unprepared students who just don't have the language training to be in, English classes, and those are very much of a challenge. But at any intermediate level, if they can understand the lecture, if it's slower, or get the notes, then that's great. If not, boy, it's difficult. Yeah. They perhaps should be redirected.
One last question? Anyone? All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming. It was so great. And my thanks to Beck and to Todd for an amazing conversation, reflections, and to all of you for taking the time to hear two amazing scholar teachers, and all the best to you. And I hope that you continue to come to some of the great things that the center is putting together. And my thanks to Anna very much for encouraging us to do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Thanks.